You know, as I'm sitting here staring at the end credits of Resident Evil Requiem, I feel something that I've rarely felt throughout my extensive gaming career that shall soon span 3 weeks and 17 hours. Few are the times where a game has left me with the same feeling as Requiem just did upon finishing it. This feeling of joy, euphoria, and glee over what I had just experienced having finished the game twice, while also feeling this deeply instinctual feeling of dread, emptiness, and sorrow as I ask myself, where does this franchise even go from here on out? What do you even do when a 3-decade-old franchise that has as many games to its name as it has years of existence reaches this point? A point where I can comfortably and confidently say that every single one of its mechanics, influences, scares, bears, and physical hairs has reached an all-time high. It is my personal opinion that Requiem has perfected the formula of the past decade of Resident Evil games. Taking a look back at 2017 when the franchise rebooted itself into a first-person survival horror game that leaned way heavier on the horror aspects of the survival horror genre with Resident Evil 7, it was a time where everyone rejoiced. Most everyone loved this new direction for the series, a direction that was clearly inspired by the phenomenon that was Kojima Productions' PT, the playable teaser for a now scrapped Silent Hills game that took the gaming world by storm by feeling like it was an actually haunted piece of tape that was going to climb out of your screen and strangle you in real life. Well, Capcom decided to try that same photorealistic take on a horror game and ran with it for about 4 hours, until inevitably crash landing on the ship section of that game, which was, to use a very technical term, kind of mid.
I gotta be honest, the ship section has actually kind of grown on me. Like, people give it a bad rap, but it's like in the speedrun, it's actually kind of fun.
Even so, long gone were the days of Chris Redfield punching a boulder in a volcano and whatever the fuck Resident Evil 6 was. And while Capcom was further experimenting with the same first-person formula in their next mainline entry, Resident Evil Village, a game that tried to blend sections that were even more terrifying than anything RE7 could muster, with sections where a MILF with ginormous mommy milkers was chasing you around a typical Romanian village, all the while her daughters that are somehow hotter than the sun were giving you sensual neck kisses, the third-person games of the franchise weren't exactly lagging behind. We got a fantastic remake of both the original fixed camera perspective Resident Evil 2 and an incredibly faithful, borderline perfect remake and reimagining of one of the most important games of all time, Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 3 Remake does not count, it does not exist. Yes, I am gaslighting you right now, but that's just how the world be sometimes, and it's something you and I gotta deal with and move past together, alright? We got this. Sure, these games had DLCs, there was even a Dead by Daylight inspired asymmetrical survival game taped to the back of a game that doesn't exist, so I don't know why I'm even mentioning all of this. But as just a quick and brief overview of the past decade of RE games, I believe this paints a clear picture. The franchise reinvented itself in 2017 to huge critical and audience success. The remakes of their classics are still incredible today, and Resident Evil Requiem takes both of these styles of game, both the tense, horror-filled first-person sections of a game like RE7, and the over-the-top, balls-to-the-walls insane, action-ridden sections of their third-person outings, and mixes them into what I would consider, at least gameplay and pacing-wise, a perfect amalgam of what each of these respective genres could potentially be, while still staying within the confounds of the survival horror genre. This decision to split the game into 2 different parts where you swap between Grace Ashcroft, an inexperienced and underprepared FBI analyst investigating a grisly set of deaths that occurred at the Renwood Hotel, and Leon S. Kennedy, a seasoned veteran who has no trouble blocking a chainsaw with his hatchet right after saying some awesome shit like,
I think I want a second opinion.
And right before sticking a shotgun into the face of said chainsaw-wielding zombie and pulling the trigger, leads to one of the greatest balancing acts of rising hopelessness and dread, and the sweet, cathartic release when you blow that tension's goddamn head clean off its shoulders with a head cannon that I have ever experienced in any game ever. Grace is so far out of her comfort zone in this situation that she finds herself in that it's not even funny. Everything from her panicked breathing, her slow movement speed, her inability to use any other weapon but pistols and shoddy homemade knives, the resource scarcity of her sections, the emphasis on stealth and hiding, and when those inevitably fail, running away in the hopes that the monster chasing you doesn't catch you. All of these instill a feeling of terror, helplessness, and one of the strongest fight-or-flight reactions I have ever experienced in a game. And even when just sitting here and looking at the game, how could it not? I have no idea if this is going to come across in the video because of compression and rendering and the like. I tried recording with settings that occasionally bricked my recording software, all in the hopes that I can properly convey just how gorgeous, rich in detail, and even realistic looking many of these locations tend to be. This footage is being played, recorded, and rendered at 1440p on a 12GB 4070 with everything apart from shadow quality set to max, with ray tracing set to high and DLSS unnecessarily being set to quality mode. I say unnecessarily because at most, this game took up about 80% of my GPU's power, and it only crashed once and dropped below my 60 FPS cap twice. I seriously have no idea what kind of deal with the devil Capcom made to where the RE engine can render this without a problem, but holy fuck, the visuals in this game, especially when viewed from a first-person perspective, might be second only to the sound design of the game. Everything from the thumping footsteps of the cute goat lady that's chasing you, to the flickering lights, the howl of wind as it passes through the cracks of the dilapidated locations you're exploring, to the gunshots, the goddamn gunshots, especially with the Requiem. It all sounds superb and adds another layer to this truly terrifying, scary, and unnerving experience. That is until you switch perspectives and the same hallways you once snuck through lost and completely helpless, the enemies you ran away from because you didn't have enough ammunition, the corners that you once peeked around with the utmost care, the fear of what horrors you might uncover behind this door, beyond this passageway, behind you as you finish solving a puzzle, get melted away as you explore these same rooms as Leon Scott Kennedy. Leon is the yin to Grace's yang, the action to her horror, the release to her tension. That sounded way too sexual. Where once every zombie you encountered was its own puzzle, with them having their own unique mannerisms as they still show a morsel of their humanity, whether you bait them with sound, a body that they have to clean up, or a light that they hate, they now become nothing more but lamb fit for slaughter by none other than this hunk of a man right here. While you could definitely see glimpses of these aspects of the game while playing as Grace, where firing a bullet straight into the zombie's head pops out its eyeball as it now hangs on the outside of the socket it once inhabited by a tiny thread, or as you push an enemy to the ground only to knife them to death in the hopes that said knife doesn't break before the enemy dies. This motherfucker right here comes equipped with plenty of ammo, an ever-expanding arsenal of weapons that only get easier to obtain on repeat playthroughs, a hatchet that can parry enemy attacks and has its own moveset, the ability to pick up downed enemy weapons and use them against their former wielders, Kevlar armor, weapon upgrades, and a no-bullshit attitude that seeps out of every fiber of his being. With the game designed in a way where he serves not only as a break from Grace's panic attack-inducing sections to bring a bit of fun and levity to the entire experience, but where Grace's sections are the main focus for the first half of the game's runtime, Leon's sections make sure that the back half of the game is basically all his. And this leads to one of the best-paced Resident Evil games that I have ever played in my life. Whereas 7 has the ship part, 8 has the fish part, 2 Remake has the sewers, and 4 Remake has some of the late-game island encounters that make that game drag on for a bit too long for my personal liking, I can't think of a single section that would make me question replaying this game in the future. Maybe one, but it's so short that I don't feel like it even really counts. Just as you are done with browning your underwear in Grace's sections, the game blesses you with a quick Leon section, then back to Grace, back to Leon, and so on and so forth to where neither part really has enough time to stagnate and turn into tedium. This switching of main characters was a risky move from the developers, yet I believe it worked 110%, and because of this decision, it leads to both some of the most terrifying, genuinely scary, and tension-filled moments I've ever felt in a horror game, and some of the most brutal, intense, satisfying, and just downright gratifying sections I've ever experienced in a third-person action survival game. I cannot see this getting any better. Which in my mind, when paired with the game's story, kind of leads to a massive problem, doesn't it? In 2016, almost exactly a decade ago to the day, and about a year before Resident Evil's rebirth in the form of Resident Evil Biohazard, From Software released their final Souls game to date, and what appears to be the final Souls game at least until their director Hidetaka Miyazaki decides to go into a well-deserved retirement, Dark Souls 3. Back then, I was way less media literate than I am today, so many of the game's themes of cycles, decay, inevitability, moving on, and more just kind of flew past my stupid teenage head. I saw the dead blacksmith giant and I felt sad. I saw the myriad of reuses, callbacks, and even Anne Orlando returning and I soy-jacked. I heard the now infamous Plin Plin Plon and saw the final boss of the game pull out the exact same moves he pulled out on me in Dark Souls 1, and I nearly cried and then refused to fight him for a solid hour. But looking back at it today with a smarter head on my shoulders, no matter how much the lore and story of the game tried to justify its existence, Dark Souls 3 always felt like the end. Not just because this world has been both literally grinded to dust in its final DLC, and figuratively grinded to dust with the series reusing the same ideas, locations, themes, bosses, and even NPCs, but when you really peer behind the curtains and look at what this game managed to achieve, you realize that there is nowhere left to go with this series. With Dark Souls 3, From Software have managed to achieve a game where the player's ability to roll complex attack patterns has reached its logical conclusion. It already doesn't help that shields in this game have been nerfed into the ground unless you use a specific spell which makes them the strongest thing in the game, so you're even more incentivized to just roll every attack. But looking at these games for what they are in their purest form, dodge an enemy attack, hit them when you have an opening, all of a sudden, fights like Sister Frieda really stretch that definition to almost a breaking point, with you literally having to run away from one of her complex flurries of attacks for what feels like 10 seconds, only to then finally get a potential hit in. Reused bosses from previous games have been sped up, Gang fights have become more frantic than ever. Bosses mix up the flow of battle with everything from graceful quick swipes to delayed attacks that punish panic rolling and everything in between. Enemies discourage backstab spamming by having inbuilt defenses against it. Yes, I know that this company moved on and made Sekiro, causing a ripple effect through the gaming lands with its timing-based deflect system that is still felt to this very day. Yes, Elden Ring is a brilliant evolution of Souls combat and my favorite game of all time, but neither of these are Dark Souls. How can they be? That series already achieved everything that can feasibly be achieved in just 3 games and 6 DLCs. The gameplay has been stretched to its furthest logical extreme. The themes and stories of this world doomed to repeat over and over again no matter what choice you make at the end of the game, no matter what you think the best way to save the world may inevitably be, it is nevertheless doomed. And trust me, there is a choice. Dark Souls ends with a choice. To finally forgo this long rotten and decayed world, or to stubbornly sit there, extending the flame bit by bit until it inevitably comes to the same, yet excruciatingly prolonged end. And as much as this may seem like a lose-lose scenario, the only silver lining, the only potential glimmer of hope in this entire series is presented in one of its endings. Not in the ending where you choose to sit there and prolong the Age of Fire, not if you are stubborn and can't let go of this clearly dead world that has been milked for all that it's worth. The only glimmer of hope is presented via one single line: if you choose to let go of this world, this gaming franchise, and plunge it into darkness.
But one day, tiny flames will dance across the darkness.
Please stop prolonging this clearly dying and decaying world. A world that has achieved heights that only gods could build and lows that even the abyss fears. This world, its gameplay mechanics, its story, its bosses, they have all run its course. Instead of just making the same thing over and over again, chasing trends and reusing assets, just let it die. And from the embers of said world, build something new. Build something grander, something better. And FromSoft did build that. A couple of times, and here's hoping for 100 more. But the only way that they managed to do that was to understand that all good things must inevitably come to an end. They stomped on the barely lit fire and let the dying embers of said fire show them a new path. The ending of Dark Souls 3 is not only incredible in wholly keeping with the themes and logic of its world, but it also feels like a prophecy of what transpired with the future of From Software games in general. 3 games into a franchise, they realized they had nowhere left to go and sent the world out with a swan song of an experience that I only now, a decade later, realize had nowhere left to go. The ending of Dark Souls 3 is one of letting go. It is one of realizing your limits, of opening your eyes to the world around you and realizing that there is nowhere left to go except to new, grander, more beautiful worlds. And because of that, the ending of Dark Souls 3 is one of the most beautiful endings to a series I have ever had the pleasure of experiencing. Resident Evil Requiem ends with a choice. Grace and Leon's story is one of survivor's guilt and making amends. Whereas Grace blames herself for the death of her mother, Leon blames himself for the countless people of Raccoon City he failed to save all those years ago when he stepped through the doors of the city's police department. Don't get me wrong, this is also a story of survival, with Leon and another returning character, Sherry, being infected with the same virus that has claimed the lives of the people whose deaths Grace is investigating. Apparently the T-virus strand that the characters were exposed to all those years ago has long-lasting consequences that nobody knew of up to this point. This ticking time bomb on Leon's body takes him all the way from the hotel and mental institution that Grace is trapped in to the outskirts of Raccoon City, whose bombed and decaying remains are slowly turning into nothing but dust and ashes, all the way to the center of the city, right back to the police station where it all started, and directly into a new super secret Umbrella research facility underneath it. As Leon moves forward and his condition grows worse by the hour, he comes face to face with a Wesker clone, who isn't really Wesker because he died in that same volcano Chris was punching a boulder in, but whose appearance and skill set is so similar to him that it might as well just be him. He encounters Lickers, enemies that to me look almost visually identical to the Regenerators of Resident Evil 4, Mr. X, twice, once for a chase sequence and once for a boss battle. Leon and the Tyrant duke it out in this city that's crumbling into nothingness, with Leon finally being able to best the monster that he wasn't able to best all those years ago. And as he and Grace fight their way through the onslaught of enemies, they finally reach their final decision. Elpis. A bioweapon that has been built up throughout the game's runtime is a super weapon meant to allow the total mind control of every person it infects, can only be unlocked by Grace. This leads you, the player, to a choice. Destroy the super weapon made with the sole purpose of mind controlling every person on planet Earth, or release it into the world and let chaos reign. My first choice was to destroy Elpis. The entire structure you're standing on begins to shake and crumble in on itself. Understanding the choice that Grace made, fake Wesker attacks her, and Leon, in his final act of defiance to the virus that is killing him, strikes him with his hatchet, buying Grace just enough time to get to safety, ultimately sacrificing himself for the girl that just saved the world. Leon's redemption arc, from cop who was fighting for his life to grizzled veteran who is now actively saving lives, is finally complete.
At least I could save you.
No!
Naturally, I thought to myself, the second option is the inverse of that. Somehow Leon survives, Grace dies, and the roles of who saved who are reversed. Granted, I couldn't really understand how that would transpire considering everything the game has told me up to this point, but surely this is the case, right? Surely they're not going to Zoe and Mia us all over again, with one of the options being the correct lore canon ending, right? Right? Well, turns out that Elpis was a lie. Elpis isn't a mind-controlling superweapon, it is in fact the antidote to the virus that Oswald Spencer and Umbrella unleashed all around the world. Leon gets cured, Grace gets a flesh wound, Leon defeats a nemesis, and then the game does something really cool. The camera just stays on the characters as the world crumbles around them. They realize that there's no means of escape, no signal to call for help, and no way of telling anyone about the antivirus that they just secured. They sit there as the lights that are illuminating the very ground they're sitting on go off one by one until it's pitch black, and then the credits roll. Psych! Just kidding, of course they get rescued, of course the guy that rescues them says that Chris Redfield sent them. Leon even says that him and Chris are going to meet one day. Whoa! Everyone is safe, everyone survives, even people who should have had no chance of surviving, guess what? They survive. And there is even a post-credit scene where the bad guys killed all of the soldiers that just saved Leon and retrieved something really dangerous and important, which is probably going to be the plot of Resident Evil X. Mr. X returns again, this time with a vengeance. Oh my god, this is so cool, right? This is cool, right? My problem with this ending, if you couldn't already tell from the previous 30 minutes, is that I sincerely don't understand where this franchise can go after this point. Parts of the world are turning into ash and dust. They are crumbling into nothingness, yet they are still reusing these places for callbacks. Leon and Sherry get cured of the T-virus, but what about Claire? What about Jill, Carlos, Ada? They were all there when this shit happened. Does this mean that all of them are infected and in need of a cure? Did Leon take enough for all of them, or are they going to have their own separate adventures where they have to find their own cure? There is a cutscene in this game where Grace got bit, which makes it canon, yet she is said to be a completely normal human with no superpowers or abilities, so why isn't she turning into a zombie? I'm willing to forgive this one because of the whole Ethan Winters thing, if you know you know, but also Mr. X is back. Yet if he can survive almost being ripped in half, who's to say that Leon taking a hatchet to his heart actually kills him? What's to prevent him from just coming back again? Or is this just one of like a dozen Mr. X clones doomed to forever be reused? And even if you want to just forgive all the lore and story blemishes, which I totally get, the Resident Evil franchise is one where the President of the United States sends one guy with a handgun to go save his kidnapped daughter, the story usually just serves as a vehicle to get these iconic characters into cool and wacky situations. Consider what I said about the gameplay of Dark Souls 3 and how there is just no way to keep that going without further evolution, and compare it to Requiem and where this series can go on from here. How much slower can you make a character run in order to ensure maximum scare factor before it just becomes ridiculous? I guess you could go with a less script-driven route that sees the enemy you're trying to avoid act more natural and random like the alien in Alien Isolation, or do the inverse of what we have now and make a monster that sprints at the speed of sound. But seriously, where does this franchise go from here on out? How much better can shooting a zombie in the head, seeing the bullet impact dislocate the eye from its socket as the blood that's now spewing from the hole in their head realistically paints the surrounding walls red, and then going in for a roundhouse kick just so you can save up on a couple of bullets? How much better can this really get? You can already parry insane enemy attacks by pressing the block button at the right moment. You can pick up dropped weapons that the enemies wield and chuck them right back, or even wield a goddamn chainsaw for a bit. The next logical step seems to be, what? Dark Souls rolls? More attacks that require even more memorization on when to block? Perhaps take a page from God of War 2018 with Leon or Chris or whoever having dedicated melee combat. Maybe an Ada Wong Sifu game or some shit. Wait, that actually sounds sick as fuck. The weapons in this game feel phenomenal. The Requiem in this game feels so good to shoot. The sound, the recoil, how it just decapitates a motherfucker. All of it is either perfect or so borderline perfect that any further refinement is going to be lost on the vast majority of players. Same goes for the shotguns, the rifles, the way Leon's hatchet doesn't just slice through enemies like a hot knife through butter, but actually slows down and gets stuck in them for a few frames. All of it looks, feels, and sounds so good when you're the one in control. Seriously, where do you go from here on out without losing the feeling of what makes for a fantastic Resident Evil game? And that is ultimately my biggest problem with the game. It's so good that it should be this franchise's swan song that marks an ending to these themes, characters, and storylines, not the beginning of 17 other stories. Resident Evil Requiem is easily the best Resident Evil game I've ever played, and I've played about a dozen of them, with some of them easily being 9 and even 10 out of 10 games for me. I sincerely, truly and honestly can't see the gameplay side of things getting much better. Capcom decided to take the best parts of the games they released in the previous decade, many of them being some of the best games in the entire franchise, crank those up to 11, while also understanding everything that made parts of those games feel like a bit of a slog, and cutting all of those boring parts out, and in the process making a game that feels amazing to play, flows perfectly, and never overstays its welcome. But whereas I feel like Capcom should slowly start to understand that 30 games in, and if you want to ignore that and just focus in on the past decade alone, 3 first-person games, 4 third-person games, and a bunch of DLC and additional content in, it's time to start wrapping things up. It's finally time to say goodbye to some of these characters. It's time to realize that the gameplay mechanics that you've spent the better part of a decade perfecting can't really get any better. The ending of this game literally sees the main antagonist do a complete 180, regret everything he's ever done and develop a cure, with the protagonists getting their hands on it, and it still isn't over. It's time to realize that this world is decaying and losing its luster. But if the canon ending of this game is anything to go by, Capcom are still stubbornly unwilling to move this franchise towards any type of conclusion. Resident Evil Requiem is a fantastic game, a love letter to fans of the franchise, and I love every single part of it apart from its true canon ending. It is hinting at games that I feel like can't get any better than the one I just played, but I guess only time will tell if I'm just blind to what more can be done with the series, or if I'm correct and Capcom are stubbornly sitting at the slowly fading fire, refusing to let go of their world, to see that there's nowhere left to go, refusing those tiny flames of creativity that could propel them to make new, greater, scarier, grander, more interesting worlds than the one we've visited 30 times already and is literally crumbling in on itself. Only time will tell if they are refusing to embrace those flames of creativity and preventing them from dancing anew. I have a very bad feeling about this, and I sincerely hope that I get proven wrong and that Resident Evil Extermination is somehow a new peak for the franchise and not the other way around.
I'll stop you as many times as I have to.
Thanks for watching.